This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Tuesday, April 30th, 2019 here in San Francisco, and Wednesday, May 1st, 2019 in Hong Kong, where my guest is, and my guest is no other than Ben Sin. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hi, Miriam. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to have you on. I'm a big fan of your work, and you've been doing some cool stuff recently, like traveling to Switzerland to see the Oppo Reno 10X. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, I wanted to know a little bit about your thoughts on this Fold drama / fiasco, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's very unfortunate because I'm a big tech geek, obviously, as we all are. So I was very, very excited about this foldable phone, and I was very eager to try it. It was actually unfortunate for me because the Hong Kong Samsung was doing a private media event about 2 days before Samsung officially delayed it. So I was set to go and check it out. And then just like the night before at midnight, the PR emailed me and said, hey, sorry, it's off.
Oh, man. Yeah. And I was almost ready to get my hands on one through T-Mobile US.
Oh, nice.
For just a hands-on, like they wouldn't have given me one to take with me. And then when it became very clear very quickly that wasn't going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunate. And I do want to thank the folks at T-Mo for, kind of this, entertaining the possibility until things got a little too wonky.
Yeah. I was surprised at how Samsung handled it early on. They kind of downplayed it, almost like what they did with the Note 7. Initially kind of dismissed it when the first batch of problems popped up, and they sent out that release saying, kind of basically downplay the problem until like 3 or 4 days later when they finally conceded that, okay, this is a major issue.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I feel that they didn't, I would have thought they would have learned their lesson by now.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on over there.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but this is something that Samsung really has to work on. Like, as a big company, having had a presence in, Western markets and Asian markets, I mean, worldwide presence in general, but knowing how to deal with media by now should be kind of something they know, right?
Yeah. Although I guess one excuse we can give Samsung is that they only gave out review units to kind of North American media, so it was mostly Samsung, I guess, North America that was handling everything. And I guess ultimately they had whatever decision they made had to go back to Seoul, so they had to wait basically, I guess, half a day for whenever Seoul people can give them the final call.
And I get that, but I think that, reflects to a lot of the issues also with Chinese company in North America. It's like you need to be able to be agile about this stuff and have local people that are trusted to be able to make these decisions,
Yeah.
I think that's a big issue. But what I wanted to talk about mostly about the Fold really was the fact that, we covered it in the last two shows here. The first show I did with Tech Alter, Martin, and we talked about mostly, the fact that we didn't have devices, but a bunch of media had received devices in the US, and we were excited about their initial hands-ons. In fact, we recorded this on the day that the display started failing, so we didn't cover the failure in the first show. And then last week, we discussed kind of like this whole display fiasco drama, right? And and that was with Mark Watson, Sold You Knows Best from the YouTube channel. And then now this week, I kind of want to touch on something that again happened while we were recording, Mark and I, which was the whole iFixit thing. And I think it ties in with what we were just talking about, the whole Samsung kind of putting their foot in their mouth when it comes to PR a lot. What's your takeaway from them, from what happened with iFixit?
I think it makes them look bad that they demanded like an independent website take off a teardown, I guess, which, it's not like iFixit got the device from Samsung. So it just makes them look bad. Makes them look a little bit on the defensive and like they have something to hide.
And that's my point. Like the whole behavior, as you said, there's a lot of parallels in the Note 7 and this. And it's just like, come on, be more transparent, be more upfront. Understand that there's the issues with time zones, but you know, you need to be able to come across as confident even when things are not going well, and be humble if things aren't going well, right? It happens. It sucks. It really does. But I felt like this whole iFixit thing just kind of, you said, made them look defensive. And I think I kind of understand what happened. I mean, my theory, and I think it's the theory of a lot of other people, is that iFixit somehow acquired this device through a partner. It'd be very interesting to know who did it. And I think I have a feeling it might have been a carrier. And it might have been a pre-existing agreement too. Like that it's possible that they had already agreed to get this device before all this madness happened, right?
Yeah.
And then they had it, and then they took it apart. And then, of course, Samsung freaked out. And then I think it's very clear from the write-up as to why they removed the story, that they didn't want to break, to burn any bridges with that partner. And they were doing it for them and not really for Samsung. And I think that's fair. Is it fair for Samsung to have asked that partner to pressure iFixit? I don't know. I don't really think it would have cost them too much to leave that up. Yeah. And I'm sure iFixit would have updated it,
Yeah.
So
what I'm still wondering about is how this even happened in the first place, because I mean, Samsung apparently has been working on this phone for years, and they've had the prototype for probably at least half a year, and nobody figured out that the design is a little bit flawed and that debris can get in very easily. I just don't understand.
I agree. I brought that up last week and in the show, and I'm like, I cannot fathom how it made it past basic quality control if those are the issues, before it even made it in the hands of the media, right?
Yeah, I like had no idea how this could happen until I watched Dave 2D. He made a video. I mean, it's just his opinion, but I thought it made a lot of sense. He theorized that Samsung was trying to rush the phone to beat Huawei to the punch, so they really didn't do any real world testing. They only tested it in the lab, and I guess when you're in the lab, it's super clean because they do all kinds of. Before you even enter a lab, they do that air, like the air vacuum cleaning.
Yeah, and you wear the little socks on top of your shoes and all that, and the cover your hair and everything.
Yeah, so maybe Samsung just tested the phone in there for like however long, and never realized that we need to take it out and about and put it in people's pockets for a week or something before you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, lint is a real issue for a lot of people, right? I know I have a lot of lint in my pockets.
Yeah.
And it ends up in everything. And, that alone is an issue. But then you have to deal with, all the other potential problems, like things actually getting trapped in there. And iFixit's, teardown was a very well done teardown. I'm sure that's the other thing that's interesting about this, is that how can Samsung even ask them to tear it down when it's the internet? There's copies of that teardown everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how the internet works. So I'm not sure what they were thinking. But anyway, aside from that, they showed, how potentially some ingress might happen. And you're right. It feels to me like marketing was so bent on being first and beating Huawei, and that pressure from Huawei, of course, having shown the Mate X at MWC, that they, probably did not listen to the multiple warnings from the engineering and testing teams, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they must have. I agree with you on the lab thing, but I do believe there are some people that might have pulled, the alarm to say, hey, this is not a good idea, but they probably weren't listened to, right? That's kind of my theory, is that, marketing was like, no, we really need this. This is too important.
Okay, yeah, that's possible too. So
either way, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in is what's going on at Huawei right now, seeing this. I feel like, because I don't know if you've met Richard Yu, he's Huawei's consumer boss. He's like notoriously outspoken and very kind of cocky, but in like a, Huawei generally backs it up, but they talk a lot of trash. So I feel like I feel like Huawei right now either has two stands. It's like two extremes. They're either really cocky and just laughing internally at Samsung, like look at those idiots over there, or they're like pretty concerned about their own device. I feel like there's no middle ground right now at Huawei. They're either one side or the other.
I think you're right. I think this is definitely something they're following closely, and I'm sure they're putting their devices to the test further.
Yeah.
If they haven't already. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if... Here's my thinking. I wouldn't be surprised, Huawei being the hardware juggernaut that they've shown to be in the last few years, I wouldn't be surprised if Huawei is pretty much at the same level of, development as Samsung is. And in a sense, Samsung rushed to be first. I don't think that Huawei is behind. I think Huawei is probably very close in terms of, everybody, the whole story about, Samsung starting this 8 years ago and all that. I believe all this is true, but I wouldn't be surprised if Huawei's been doing this for quite a while. And they're probably very close to ready, but maybe the reason that they, chose late summer or whatever that date they gave for the Mate X was to do more testing. And just because reason prevailed for them, they didn't feel like they needed to be first.
Yeah,
whereas Samsung, I think, has made such a big deal about this folding phone thing for so long now that they really kind of had to follow through with being first, despite all the warnings.
Yeah, and I didn't help that at MWC, Huawei was quite open at letting media test the phone. Like, I mean, they didn't show it off publicly, but privately, like I got to hold the phone for like a minute, and at least probably 30, 40 people got to play with the phone. Whereas Samsung, nobody could touch the phone until they sent it out to their handpicked 12 people or whatever. So that says a lot too, I think.
For sure. It's also really odd how the publication and the YouTube creators that they picked, because, they didn't, normally you see some logic, like, they look for numbers, or they look for circulation, or they look for influence, or they look for, maybe a geographic area. But if you look at the people I picked, it's kind of all over the place. There's very few West Coast YouTube creators, for example.
Yeah.
Like Austin Evans or John Morrison. There is, however, some publications that were completely missed, right? Like New York Times didn't get one.
Yeah.
Which is kind of insane to me. Why give one to the Wall Street Journal and not the New York Times? In my opinion, as somebody who worked at Pebble as a marketing and PR person in the heyday of the company, I seeded the review units for Pebble Steel, which is the watch I launched at CES, I think 2014. And I specifically chose to not give a device because we were limited in number of devices. I chose to not give a device to the New York Times and Wall Street Journal because I figured, look, they're not the tech nerds, right? Like, I'd rather have them play with later devices that are non-pre-production, when the software is even a little further polished, and I feel more confident with the Virgin and Gadget and those folks having first dibs, right?
Yeah.
And it caused quite a stir. I got in trouble with Wall Street Journal when they found out that the Virgin and Gadget, but I explained it to them. I said, look, this is, I want you to have this as if you were a consumer, right? Not the early adopter tech savvy bulk, right?
Yeah.
And it's a tough one when you have a limited number of devices. So I understand these constraints, having been on the other side of the fence. But at the same time, I feel like, Samsung, their messaging around this was so BS,
Yeah.
It's like, come on, we can read through the lines. But this whole iFixit thing, I think they should just left it alone. And I would, instead of having asking them to take it down, I would have said, hey, would you consider doing a completely in-depth update once we have a newer device? That kind of supersedes in terms of visibility on your site the previous one. That's what I would have asked. I wouldn't have said, please take it down, or pressured my partner that is also their partner, right, or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a cultural difference too, because I think any American company would understand that if you ask someone to take it down, it looks worse, it looks bad.
Yeah.
But Asian companies, I can totally see Huawei or another Chinese company doing the same thing. And I think just Asian companies have a different mentality. It's more like we just need to get it off the internet, like not knowing that actually helps it go viral when something gets banned or gets
Exactly.
pulled. Yeah.
But you know, it's interesting because I, as a consultant, as you know, because I've pitched you a few times, I work with startups. A lot of them are out of Asia, China in particular, and Taiwan, and so I'm acutely aware of the cultural differences. And you know, I always have to teach them about how to handle the North American media, especially when they're trying to launch products in North America. And it's interesting to me how you're right. There is certainly a disconnect, but at the same time, once you explain it to them, they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so I'm surprised that nobody, after all these years of them being big brands and dealing with Western media, that they haven't had that that somebody in the company hasn't had that conversation with them,
Yeah.
It's weird to me. Like, I expect it from a startup out of Shenzhen, but I don't really expect it out of a major manufacturer. And this is why, especially after the Note 7 in this case, right? The Note 7 should have taught them transparency and quick response, which is I'm not seeing at all in this. And then I'm seeing panic and, defensiveness, as you pointed out. So, yeah. But anyway, I wanted to just kind of touch on this because, I thought I'd ask you what you think. But I want to move on to another thing that's kind of related. Some patents have been found out there. It's always fun to browse patent databases, but there are some patents out there for a Samsung wraparound display that would cover the entire front of a phone and then, kind of like do a U-turn over the top of the phone and cover part of the back. And this would not be a folding display. This would just be a flexible OLED that would be, manufactured to be curved and put in place, kind of like the, edges on the Samsung Galaxies today, the S Galaxies anyway.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Do you like the idea? Do you think it's cool? Do you want to see it?
I think it's cool, but I think because I'm like a hardcore tech geek, so I'm always open to all these kind of weird ideas. But I think practically, it seems like it does the exact same thing that we've already seen out of Chinese phones with two screens. The only difference is you get the extra benefit of having like a screen that actually covers the top of the phone too. So I saw some of the pictures. You can use it kind of like a ticker display when you're pulling out your purse.
Exactly. There's that.
So that's the only benefit though. Other than that, it does the exact same thing as say the Vivo Nix Dual Display already. So it kind of seems like using really tricky technology and make the phone maybe not as durable just to add, I'm not even sure if it's like 5% more practicality.
Oh, I don't think it's for the practicality. I think it's purely a design decision at that point. I mean, there are, as you said, the ticker would be one thing. Another thing I could see happening is, imagine you have an app on the main screen, right? Like say you're looking at Gmail.
Yeah.
Imagine swiping the app upwards and it just kind of like scrolls around to the other side and you can flip the phone over and you have it on the other side.
Oh yeah, that would be cool too. Yeah.
That would be cool, right? Stuff like that. So, I mean, but you're right. It's, the audience for this show, and this from me as well, we're all big nerds and early adopters here. So, form factors that are different are definitely on top of my list of interests, even if sometimes they're not the best, long-term decisions. They're always interesting to explore. So I'm open to this. I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it fits really well with what Samsung's been doing in terms of flexible OLEDs, right? I mean, this is one of their strengths. And you could have a piece of curved glass here that would cover this and you wouldn't have any of the issues of wear. And I mean, you have the drop issue, right? Dropping on a corner of the curve, but I think you'd have less of a wear and tear issue than on a folding phone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely
be interesting.
Would be interesting. Not sure how ready that is, but I'm assuming actually it might be closer to reality because they can make screens that bend already.
Yeah, I don't think this is too far off. I mean, it seems perfectly feasible to me. And I don't know, the patents are interesting. They show some uses and applications for it. You're right that a lot of them are mostly the same we've seen before with the Vivo and the Nubia dual screen display. So yeah. Have you reviewed any of these, by the way?
Yeah, I got to try both the Nubia X and the Vivo Nix Dual Display.
Yeah, I played with the Nubia at CS, but I didn't actually get a device yet. But I'm hoping, the problem is that as a US based publication, my podcast it's sometimes hard to get the Asian phones, even though I have some pretty sympathetic ears in some PR circles. But there are others that are like, well, US based, why would we give you this phone? I'm like, my audience is a lot of it is from India, a lot of it is from Asia. So it's like, they want to know, and I would love to be able to show them and give them the love. But it's interesting. It's hard to get some of the phones out here, especially if you're a slightly smaller content creator in terms of your traffic, right?
Yeah, and
So
Nubia, they're a really small brand, and the PR is kind of really inconsistent. So Nubia X, I don't think they sent out any review units other than to Chinese speaking media. Like I didn't get mine. I had to purchase mine, but that's a lucky thing.
Wow.
I live in Hong Kong where we get every phone really fast. So I was able to buy that probably like a week after they announced it, and I did my review of it, and I sold the phone back after I was done.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I don't know. I think it's something to watch. I like quirky form factors, so I'm cool about it. So let's dive into something that we've again covered for the third show now, but we kind of briefly touched on it on the first show with Martin, and then last week with Mark, we talked about it a little bit more in depth because the news was fresh. All the reports were coming from Zurich of the the Reno 10X launch from Oppo, and so you went to Switzerland and you have a review unit still, or you had one for a while?
No, I did not. I did not get to take my. I was there. I got to use the phone for 2 days, but then Oppo made us give it back before we leave.
Because they're Chinese phones, right?
Yeah, so I don't have one on.
Yeah,
me.
They weren't final software, right? Was that the other thing for the camera?
Yeah, but I don't quite know how it works because some of them got to take it home. Like Super Saf has one definitely, but I understand he's like way bigger, so I understand why Oppo would make a special occasion for. But some of them do have a unit on them back home, but a lot of us had to give it back.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, it is what it is. I'm in the same boat as you, I do write for some slightly bigger publications, but really my podcast is doing well, but it's not like a huge thing. And my YouTube channel is just kind of a complement to the podcast. I think your YouTube channel is pretty good. You're doing some kind of major reviews on there, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying.
I think you're doing good. So what's your take on this phone? You compared it to the P30 Pro as well. So what's your takeaway?
I like it a lot. I think it's one of the best looking phones I've seen in recent months, but that's completely just my opinion though, because I like phones that are more understated. So I like that the back of the phone is completely smooth, like the LG G8. There's no camera bump. Everything is smooth. Right. And I really like the black color that I tested. I did not get to see the green, but I think I like the black color better. And just overall, there's not much missing from the phone other than waterproofing and wireless charging. Other than these two, it ticks every box. It has a Snapdragon 855. It has a good camera. And the 10x zoom is pretty legit. And the overall build, it feels very nice. No notch. So there's a lot to like with the phone. It's not too expensive.
Sweet. Yeah. And interesting the way the selfie camera works, right? With that kind of like pivoting shark fin, people are calling it. Yeah.
I forgot about that because I rarely take selfies. But yeah, I think, and I actually think that shark fin design actually makes sense because if you think about it, only one end, like that component only elevates on one end instead of the previous design on, say, the Oppo Find X or the Vivo Nex, where like two sides move up. So this should make it more durable because you have 50% less moving parts.
Yeah, and also you don't have to worry about, the issue when you have two rails on which something slides vertically, like in a straight line motion, is if one side binds, right, you're kind of stuck. So with a pivot, the only way this can bind now is on one side, and then the whole thing's useless. But it's less likely to because you always have that pivot, which, as a pivot acts as a lever. So any obstruction might actually be less of an issue, right?
Yeah, so definitely makes sense. At first when I saw it, I thought it was just like a gimmick that they went for like a different shape just for the looks, but no, it actually makes sense for practical reasons.
Cool. What else is there to say? So you compared them, the two cameras, the P30 Pro.
Yeah, just the 10
and
times
the-
zoom. Just the 10 times zoom because that's the standout feature. And actually, I feel bad for Oppo because Oppo's been working on this and they've been teasing the 10 times zoom for 2 years now. And then somehow Huawei beat them to the market by like a month. And you know, a month, it's not that long in most other cases, but in the cutthroat Chinese smartphone market, that's a long time.
That's like a year.
Yeah, like the Oppo
Almost,
Reno.
it feels like.
Yeah, Oppo Reno would have grabbed a lot more headlines had it beat the P30 Pro to it. If it was, you know, like the 10 times the zoom.
Do you feel that the quality is a match? What had me interested was that the Oppo has a f over 3.0 aperture versus the 3.4 aperture on the P30 Pro. Do you notice a difference in low light performance?
Yeah, I think the Oppo Reno can pull in more light, but so far from what I've seen, the Huawei P30 Pro's 10 times zoom has more clarity. It's a more crisp image. But I'm using pre-production software on Oppo Reno, so I shouldn't judge that, you know, definitively.
Right, of course. I mean, and they were very clear about that. Everybody's reported that. So, I mean, kudos to Oppo for letting you play with it early like that. I have a question for you. Nobody's been able to answer this for me. I mean, I should say you're the first person I've really asked that had the device in hand. What is that tiny little round thing right below the three cameras? Is that the flash? It looks like looks like a little icon or something.
It's not a flash. The flash is actually part of that.
Oh, that's right. It's in the shark fin. Yeah.
So that thing, I don't know what it is too, and I think it's just for design.
It's not a button or something, right?
No, it's not. I definitely couldn't figure out any use for it, and I asked Oppo, but I haven't heard back yet. I should actually probably double check. But I'm pretty sure it's just a design because
I think it's just a design.
Yeah, I've read a couple of other people's write-ups and nobody knew what it does. So.
I was like, you're right. I knew the flash was on the shark fin, but I was kind of second guessing myself. Every time I look at it, I'm like, what is that? A button, a logo, a little design feature, an LED of some kind. Like what? Anyway, cool. What about the rest? I mean, did they let you play with? They let you play with all the cameras, right? This does have the Sony IMX586, the 48 megapixel sensor, correct?
Yes.
How did that perform in that application?
I thought it performed very well. I only had about 1 day of taking photos, and from what I've seen, I like what I've seen so far. But I did focus mostly on the zoom during my day with it. But yeah, I didn't really get a chance to examine the 48 megapixel photos too much. But it shoots in 12 megapixel, you know, obviously, because then if you want to shoot in 48, it's like a hassle. You have to go into like pro mode. So just.
Yeah, it's the same on all of them. Like the View 20 is like that.
Yeah.
I mean, because it has a quad Bayer filter, doesn't it? Doesn't do pixel binning for the by default, and then you can decouple it if you want. But yeah,
and I'm really impressed with the camera overall. Oppo's night mode. I'm not sure if they call it night mode or night something, but the night mode, it works very well.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that phone. I hope that Alex at Oppo here's my wanting this so bad. I did ping him about it, but he doesn't know me super well, so I'm hoping that that he can get me a review in it once it's actually available. Because photography is one of the long-time focuses of my interest in mobile phones and mobile technology. So we'll see how it goes. Anything else that stood out for you about this phone? I mean, obviously, there's a lot to talk about because it is their flagship and it does have, notchless screen and a bunch of stuff. Is it a 1080p display or Quad HD?
1080p.
1080p. Cool. It's a really affordable phone, isn't it, though, compared to the P30 Pro?
Compared to the P30 Pro, yes, but it's still more expensive than say any of the OnePlus or Xiaomi's or Honors. I think it's like what, €799, so that's like about 850 US. So it's not cheap, but it's not expensive. It's still like $200-300 cheaper than what Apple, Samsung, and Huawei are charging for the top phone. So,
okay. Well, I mean, I still think that sounds pretty good. Like for what you're getting there.
Yeah.
$855, you know.
Yeah, it feels very premium in the hand. So.
And it has an in-display fingerprint reader?
Yes, yeah, and it works very well.
Optical, I presume, right?
Yeah, optical. What's your stance on it? Because I know MKBHD, he's really critical of it, but I like the optical better than Samsung's fingerprint. I just think it's faster.
So far, I only have one data point for the 3rd gen sensors, which is what I have in my P30 and P30 Pro devices. And I have to say it's a huge improvement. The 2nd gen sensor that I have in my Oppo R17 Pro and in my OnePlus 6T, the various colors of OnePlus 6T that I have, are definitely too slow and unreliable for me to feel comfortable recommending them. But I think the 3rd gen has solved that problem, at least the Huawei one. I haven't played with the Oppo one, and I'm sure the OnePlus 7, when it comes out, will have an updated sensor, at least I hope. Because that was, when I reviewed the OnePlus 6T, I felt that was one of the major steps backwards in terms of, like, I like the technology, like I want it to be in the display. I think it's cool, but it's more important to me that it works almost like 99% of the time, like the rear fingerprint sensors do. And the ultrasonic in the Samsung is definitely better than the 2nd gen optical, but I feel that the P30 Pro and P30s that I have are still faster with their 3rd gen optical sensors.
Yeah, I'm not sure if like each individual's fingers works a little bit differently, because I was always surprised when I hear like MKBHD and a couple of others say the optical scanners on the P30 Pro wasn't good. When from my experience, I can unlock the P30 Pro
really good,
faster and more accurately than I can my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. So, and
for me, it's about a wash. They're about equivalent. They're, I would say, reliable enough that I don't feel frustrated and I don't want to knock that feature. Yeah, that's basically it. But there's still room for improvement in both, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I have some good news, because you're asking about you're wondering about the OnePlus 7. I'm pretty sure it's gonna get improved to at least the 3rd generation, because I don't even know if this is public info yet, but the OnePlus, Oppo, Vivo, Huawei, all the in-display fingerprint sensor comes from the same vendor. It's a company in China called Goodix. I'm actually working with them now to try to do a story on it, but basically all the devices use the same scanner across. I didn't know that until like a couple of weeks ago too.
Wow, that doesn't surprise me, to be honest, but that's good to know. I mean, look, if they can jump to a 4th gen sensor on the OnePlus 7, I'm on board. I mean, the 3rd, as I said, I don't feel frustrated and I feel I can use it. The 2nd was still too bad. The 1st was just unusable. But I still feel like, the P30 Pro and the P30, just like the Galaxy, even though they're completely different technologies for the fingerprint sensing, there's still enough false misses that I sometimes think, this needs improvement. Whereas, I'm hoping that it gets to a point where it just feels like the capacitive ones in the back of phones or in below display, like in the old days, Yeah. Yeah, like nobody does that anymore because everybody wants 0 bezel. So
yeah,
remember the P20 and P20 Pro when they showed them to us like last year? I mean, I was super stoked about the camera and stuff, but that ugly front-facing fingerprint reader at the bottom of the chin there, I was just like, no, you're going backwards.
Yeah, especially since the Mate 10 had a smaller chin because it had the fingerprint sensor on the back on the Mate 10 Pro at least. Yeah.
I know. It was so weird. Oh well, I think that's all being resolved now with the P30 Pro and the P30. So I think we're good.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to that phone, and I'm looking forward to comparing it with the P30 Pro. And I'm sure that we'll be comparing this phone as well because Oppo and OnePlus PBK, that we'll be comparing this phone with the OnePlus 7 Pro or whatever that variant's going to be called. Because there's rumors, and we'll get to that in a second, but there's rumors that it has a 3 times optical zoom, which is not obviously the same as a periscope 10 times zoom.
Yeah.
But this would be the first OnePlus phone with a 3 times optical. So before we talk about that, though, I want to really touch quickly on the Moto G7 Power I reviewed. Have you played with any of the G series from Moto this year?
I have not. They're the one. They're one of 2 or 3 brands that completely fell between the cracks in terms of my coverage, because Moto doesn't they don't really have a market in Hong Kong anymore, so there's no Hong
It's
Kong
Lenovo,
PR.
right?
Yeah. So they don't
absolutely.
have Hong Kong PR, and I don't have much contacts from Lenovo, so I've never played with the phone, and I don't see the phone on sale in Hong Kong too. But I read your review, and it seems like pretty reasonable phone.
Yeah, I was surprised. So the G series in North America has been kind of like the flag bearer. I don't want to say flagship because flagship means something else, but the flag bearer of the mid range. Like if you in North America, if you want to buy a phone with a warranty that's unlocked, that's a mid range phone.
Yeah.
There's very few, and the one that really sticks out every year since the original Moto G is the G series. So the G, the G2, then the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, 7. We're at 7 now, and starting with the 5, there was a bit of a change in price going, kind of like what OnePlus did, price going up, but build quality and materials going up as well. Up to the G4 and including the G4, it was kind of like, it's a plastic phone. We make no excuses for it. It's affordable. It has great features and great specs for the money. And that was good. But then with the 5, they used a metal back. They still had a plastic chassis, but they had a metal back. And, they used the same camera sensor as the Galaxy S7 at the time, but without OIS, which is a pretty great sensor if you remember at the time.
Yeah.
So an OIS-less version of the Galaxy S7 sensor in a $250 phone. So that was the G5. And then the G6 knocked it out of the park. I reviewed it last year. It's on the same website as my G7 Power review. And they made a full metal and glass, like aluminum chassis, glass front and back, mid-range phone that was good at everything for $250. It was amazing. And it was the only thing I would say was a bit of a drawback potentially was Snapdragon 450, because that has not aged well,
Yeah.
But at the time, it was still competitive a year ago. So that was the G6. But then the G7, things changed with the G7. So in the last few years, they've kind of had a Play Edition, which is a cheaper version, and a Plus Edition, which is kind of a on steroids version. And then the middle one has always been the G without any suffix, right?
Yeah.
So it's got G Play, G regular, and G Plus. This year, they added a fourth one that's right below the G7 regular and above the G7 Play called the G7 Power. And that one has basically a one-trick pony in a way. It's all about battery life. It's got a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. And when I went in, they sent me both that and the regular G7 to review. And I was all set to review the G7 because I'm like, this is the one we review. We all review the baseline one because there's lesser and better. And it's going to be great. I'm sure of it. And I received them both. And I immediately noticed that the G7 this year is pretty much like the G6 last year. Great in every way, except that they're cheaping out a little bit because the chassis is plastic. So glass back, glass front, but instead of an aluminum frame with antenna bands, they have some sort of polycarbonate resin kind of material in the middle. And obviously it's probably more durable and cheaper to make. But the price has gone up by $50. So it's almost $300. And so I was like, what are you doing, Moto? And the only thing I can think of is that they've updated the entire series of G series phones to Snapdragon 600 now, 632 for the bottom 3, and the top one is 636. So that's definitely more power. That's definitely a much better experience, especially today with the demands of Android Pie, right? So I was like, okay, the price has gone up. It's plastic, but overall it's the best. But then I looked at this power they sent me alongside, and I was like, wait a minute. Are you the secret sauce in this new mid-range G series? Because you seem really cool. You're $50 cheaper than the regular G7. You have $250. So the same price as the G6 was last year. You still have the Snapdragon 632 in you. You have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and you make no excuses about being a plastic phone. You're full plastic, right? Glass front, plastic shell, and then in the back there's like faux glass. It's like plastic that's made to look like glass. So it's like plexiglass, I guess. So it does have that kind of premium look, but when you touch it, you immediately know it's plastic and you're like, okay, it's cheaper. And I thought to myself, yeah, the display is 720 instead of 1080. The camera is a single camera in the back, but the same specs as the other camera on the G7. and you have a 5,000 milliamp battery and you're $50 cheaper, you seem much more interesting to me. So I reviewed that one and I put a little paragraph in there comparing it to the G7 so people can make educated decisions. But ultimately, what blew me away about it was it is a solid mid-ranger that has literally 3-day battery life. We're talking about 12 to 14 hour on-screen on time. It's amazing. And I think a lot of that is to do with the Snapdragon 632 being efficient, but also they went down to 720p displays. You lose a bit of resolution.
Yeah.
And you do notice that on small fonts, but that's because I'm used to flagships all the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, most people won't notice. It's still a good display. And then the camera, having no second camera in the back, means that you can't do portrait with parallax. So it's doing actually face recognition for portrait. And it's okay. I mean, honestly, other than a Pixel, I still don't think there's any phone that does portrait properly.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I could be biased, but that's my opinion. So I'll let that go for a $250 phone.
Yeah.
So honestly, I felt it was a pretty good mix. Are there any phones out there for you on your market in Hong Kong that hit that $200 to $300 US price point that you feel that you want to recommend to everyone every time?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily in Hong Kong, but more like in China and Southeast Asia, because they get really good budget phones. So what I was about to say is I was talking about the Moto G7 is the US market's kind of in a vacuum. So it's because, they Chinese brands aren't available there. So at least most Chinese brands. So they can still price phones at this range because I don't think the G7, like you said, it's a good deal, but that's because you live in the US for American consumers. Because if you put this compared to the stuff that's available here, it's actually not a good value because I'm testing right now a Meizu 16S. Meizu is a smaller Chinese company.
Yeah.
And it has a Snapdragon 855 chipset, completely glass and metal construction, and the phone sells for $420. So,
wow.
Yeah, so just Chinese brands, the stuff they're selling to Southeast Asia and China are just completely. It's almost kind of like the bending the rules to what a mid-tier or budget device should be. Almost to the point that they're undercutting their own flagships. Like I think Honor phone does the same thing. Like sometimes like the Honor View 20 and the Honor Play, it runs on the same chipset as like the Huawei flagships, but it's like half the price. So it almost makes it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so it's almost like if you look at the two phones side by side, it's not worth it to get the Huawei. At the time, it was the Mate 20 over the Honor Magic 2 or the Honor View 20.
View 20. Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware of that because I've been following this. But of course, when I'm writing for Geekspin, being primarily US audience, I have to think about that. So in my conclusion, I said, you probably saw it. I said like, the Honor 8X is a phone that is not available in the US, whereas the 7X, the 6X were available. And I said, the Huawei Mate 20 Lite would be phones that if you can buy them, maybe without a warranty, and if assuming the bands work in the US, that I would probably pick over this G7 Power or the G7 in general. They don't have quite the large batteries though, but they probably have pretty good stamina because Kirin chipsets are pretty good.
Yeah, so I wonder how much longer, like how many more years this can last where the US kind of operates in a vacuum in terms of the market, because I feel like 10 years ago this could fly where you have two drastically different markets and prices, but now anyone who's tech savvy will go online and do a search and be like, whoa, I can get like an Honor View 20 if I order it off a website. Even with the markup, it's still a much better deal than say a lot of other so-called mid-tier phones that you would get officially in the US. But the only issue is, like you said, you might not get warranty and the bands may not work fully.
That's the biggest challenge. Like I got an 8X review unit from Huawei USPR, and they were very clear to me. They're like, this is a European model, and unlike our high-end flagships, it has no bands for the US.
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you mean no band? Like there's always one band that'll work. And I was astonished, Ben, that I could only get 3G HSPA on AT&T, but not on T-Mobile. And I was relegated to 2G Edge on T-Mobile and no LTE whatsoever.
Okay.
And so there's that. But the other problem too, you have to understand is even when I review the G7 Power, which is a readily available with warranty phone that you can buy not just from Moto directly on the website, but you can go to Best Buy and B&H, the camera store in New York City, and other places and buy it with a warranty. Even though those phones exist, they sell maybe 5 of them a year. I'm joking, I'm exaggerating, but like, you know what I'm saying? The US market is so weird because people just go to their operator.
Yeah.
And when they go to their operator, they immediately get upsold to a flagship.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can get like a nice iPhone or Galaxy S series phones, even like an S9 from last year even, for less than $20 a month.
Yeah.
And they always sell them to you as kind of like this package, you know, no interest for 2 years, $20 a month. As long as you have service with us, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, markets like the US and Japan, they're always gonna go for mostly flagships. And then meanwhile you have developing markets like in Southeast Asia, India specifically, where they go for the really good value. So that means these mid-tier phones, I just don't see how they can have a future in a couple of years. Just like LG, you know, LG's mid-tier lineup has basically died out because no one's gonna buy it because people are either buying flagships or you can spend $200-$300 on and get a really good phone. Like Oppo has a sub brand called Realme, and their phones are amazing for $200.
And there's Redmi, right, too, which is Xiaomi.
Yeah, but yeah, I've been testing the Realme the phones, and for $200, it's seriously it's really, really good. Like it's almost like to a point now where when people ask me what phones to buy, I always ask them, are you like a really techie power user? Because if you are, then I'll recommend the flagships. But if not, there's no reason to get a flagship. You might as well just get like a OnePlus, or if you want to go cheaper, get an Honor or a Realme, because it will do the exact same thing that most people do day to day, like go on Instagram.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. Until last year, 2018, when the Honor 7X was the last phone sold by Honor in the US. And that was it was announced December 2017, just before the whole thing went down at CES with Huawei pulling the Mate 10 from AT&T stores. Remember that?
Yeah.
So until then, we always had a pretty healthy competition from ZTE and Huawei or Honor in the mid range in the US, and then it just vaporized overnight because of that mishap. And then because of the ZTE thing, right? You know how they were fined?
Yeah.
ZTE just vaporized. Now they're back, but they're going to have to rebuild their brand equity. So it's challenging because Moto's always been there, and now Moto kind of owns the market. And that's why I recommended these phones saying, like, beware of the bands, but I recommend them. And then I also finished my review by saying, you know, for me, honestly, if you're going to spend almost $300, like say you decide to not get the G7 Power, but you want to get the G7 regular, which is list price $300. Of course, your street price will find it a little cheaper. But at that point, you know, you can go online and buy a Pocophone F1.
Yeah.
And you're getting a way better phone in every way.
Yeah.
And it works in the US. It works fine. It has all the bands because it's Snapdragon 845.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been saying to people. I was like, you know, if you're really tech savvy, spend a little more, but get yourself something like a Pocophone or, like you said, an Honor Play, or something like that. Because the Honor Play has the Kirin 970, so it's actually all the bands are supported, right? Because these flagship chips, they have the radios that go with it. So
yeah, I think at this point the mid-tier market in the US only cater to people who are trying to save a bit of money, but also they're not like too tech savvy. They're not going to read like Android Authority, for example. They'll just kind of walk into a carrier and try to, or a Best Buy and try to find something in the budget. Because you're right, anyone that, if they do a little bit of research, they will know, wow, if I get a Redmi or a Xiaomi, you can get a Xiaomi Mi Mix 3 right now. If you order online and ship it to the US, you can probably still get it for under $450. And that's
amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. So that kind of brings us actually as a good segue to the OnePlus 7 Pro and that 3x zoom camera we just talked about a little bit. And the reason it brings us there is because OnePlus is the only brand in the US that's a Chinese brand that is successful.
Yeah.
Insofar that don't have the stigma of being a Chinese or a Huawei or ZTE associated company. And And they are sold officially by T-Mobile USA in their stores, and they have a little special display in every store, and they have them in stock in every store. So when you walk into a T-Mobile store in the US, you're not just encouraged to either buy an iPhone or a Galaxy S. You're encouraged to also look at the OnePlus 6T. And so I'm super excited about what's going to happen with the OnePlus 7 and OnePlus 7 Pro this year. Whether both these phones will come to the US or only one, and if, whichever one does come or both come, what it means, whether more operators are going to pick them up in the US. And again, this Pro 3x camera, those samples from Wired UK look really good, right?
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, and to your point, I think OnePlus's marketing team has done such an amazing job. They are probably the most beloved Android brand to Western reviewers, in my opinion. But I guess because the software is so clean too. Like, I feel like if you read any English reviews from the US or UK, they all love the OnePlus phones because for the good pricing and the clean,
I have to say, software. I love it too. For me, it's as a primarily I've always had my main phone has always been an Nexus or a Pixel, primarily because I wanted to have the purest Android and the most updated Android in my pocket.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm finding it harder and harder proposition when OnePlus is doing such a great job with an almost completely stock experience as well. Yeah. And I don't know, this maybe the OnePlus 7 Pro, based on all the leaks so far, might sway me to make that my daily driver because, for me, the biggest issue with the Pixel 3 XL is it's ugly. And, the hardware for the price could be more refined.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it could be better spec'd. Like 4 gigs of RAM is ridiculous, but also single camera. If Google, with their incredible computational photography expertise, had multiple camera sensors and lenses in the back of a Pixel device, first of all, it would bring them into parity with the rest of the flagships at the same price. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in October, which is usually when they launch their new flagship phones. But I think at the same time, I feel like they missed the boat on doing that for the 3 series because they could see the writing on the wall was very clear, last year about this time of year that 2019 flagships would have multiple cameras. Yeah. Right? And then they came out in October with this phone with the multiple camera in the front, but not in the back. And can you imagine if their hardware equivalents of what Huawei has in terms of lenses and sensors, if they could apply their computational photography, that I think is way better than Huawei's computational photography, to that hardware, it'd be magical. And that's what I want to see Google do. But I have a feeling that Google's not going to do that.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating.
I'm not too familiar with the Google because their phones aren't sold in Hong Kong, but I've tested it and yeah, like great camera, but everything else, like the hardware, it's just like I don't know what they're thinking.
It's very meh, right? Exactly. And for a while you could kind of get away with that because really the software was what really you wanted to experience.
Yeah.
And as long as the rest of it was okay. But now I feel like everybody in the flagship world has really pushed the envelope hard. Like everybody's trying to outdo each other with gradient colors under like matte glass, like all this really cool stuff that we see Oppo, Vivo, and all the Chinese manufacturers making, including OnePlus and including Huawei. And at the same time, here we are with just another slab of glass and metal that, as Apple likes to say, the phone is a window into the software. It doesn't need to be flashy. And I don't agree with that. I think your hardware should be flashy. Like hardware should be cool. The software should certainly be cool as well. But, it's kind of the other extreme. Like in China, some of the user experience I feel is a little, at least for somebody who's used to stock Android, is a little brutal and difficult.
Oh, yeah. Trust me. I agree with you. Chinese software skins, a lot of them are very, very bad. Like even Huawei's EMUI, I don't like EMUI at all. So
neither do I. It's interesting because it's the opposite, right? The hardware is incredible, but the software is like, ugh. And then you go to Pixel and to iPhone, and I feel the software is really what shines. And I'm not saying the hardware from Apple and the hardware from Google is bad, but it's just generic. It's kind of boring. Yeah. I think the Apple one is certainly better crafted than the Google one. But I feel like overall there doesn't seem to be any passion there. You know,
Yeah.
to me, a phone is not only your main personal computer these days, it is also an expression of who you are. And having color choices, having material choices, having design choices is interesting. And that's what people shouldn't just get a good software experience, they should get a good hardware experience too. And that's, if you go flagship, like, and that's where the Pixel is right now, Pixel 3 and Pixel 3 XL, they're categorized as flagship devices, but I don't feel that they live up to that, you know?
Yeah, me neither,
So-
other than the camera. Because even the
Other
software,
than the camera.
even the software, I prefer OnePlus's software over stock Android, but that's just my
It's
opinion.
interesting.
Yeah.
I prefer ASOP actually, or slightly modify ASOP, like what Moto's doing, what OnePlus is doing. Then I feel that Google's now, the Pixel software experience is almost a skin in its own right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's almost deviated too far from the Android open source experience, in my opinion.
And also the new pill navigation on the Pixel.
Oh my God, the fact that you're forced into that is
Yeah.
one of my biggest gripes with my Pixel 3.
I don't
XL.
like that navigation at all. So I'm so glad. Like, I just like the OnePlus software so much better because it gives me the options to, I can use the pill if I want, or I can use
Or the buttons.
Yeah, or in my opinion, OnePlus's superior swiping gesture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. 100% agree with you. And that kind of brings us to the next topic. We were talking about pixels a lot, and there is two kind of bits of news. There's been more leaks. DV Leaks has leaked some pictures of the, supposedly coming soon, potentially at Google I/O next week, Pixel 3a and 3a XL, which are going to be mid-range pixels that are still probably going to benefit from the camera experience, but have lesser chipsets and lower price points and headphone jacks and all that good stuff. And honestly, in my opinion, might actually be better fits for what Google's trying to do with the Pixel line. Because if you look at, as I said, it's not really good enough as a flagship, the 3 and 3 XL anymore.
Yeah.
Now, it might be fixed with the Pixel 4. But in the meantime, here we're going to have some mid-range phones that are going to be aggressively priced that are probably going to be 90% of a Pixel 3 or Pixel 3 XL experience. And I think fit in better with the philosophy that Google is kind of going after. And more importantly, might be more of a better fit for the market right now, where it's a tough sell to make flagships these days because it's really expensive and people are not wanting to spend as much money anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. But see, when you said earlier it should be competitively priced, but again, I think that's by US standards, right? Because the phone's still probably
no,
going to
exactly.
be
No, absolutely.
like $500-600
Thank
maybe.
you for
So,
saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're looking at 450 or something.
Okay.
I think for the small one, which you're right, it's still like you can buy a Poco phone for $300.
Yeah.
You're done. Like, I mean, it's hard to justify, right?
Yeah, like Chinese brands have completely just thrown a monkey wrench into what we used to think of with consumer electronics pricing. So, but yeah, I definitely think in the US or North America, the Pixel 3a, it's going to have a good market because you get a really good camera for $450 or whatever. But I don't think I don't think Pixels are even sold officially in Asia, but they have no chance in selling in Asia, basically.
That's not going to happen. I mean, this is mostly US and then maybe Europe. And I think that it's interesting insofar that you're right. I'm when I say, priced more competitively, as I meant for this market. Because ultimately, as I said, a Poco phone F1, the F1 is such a great phone for the money. The camera, I mean, again, if they can deliver with the Pixel 3a the same quality of camera experience as a regular Pixel 3, say they use the same module, right?
Yeah.
And they've optimized the crap out of it to run on the Snapdragon 600 series or 660 or whatever they're going to use, it might just make the 3 and 3 XL completely worthless, irrelevant, basically.
Yeah.
Because that's really the only thing you're gaining right now by buying a regular Pixel 3 or 3 XL, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. So let's stay tuned for next week because I'll be doing a show from Google I/O. I'll be at Google I/O. I'm sure I'll have one of the usual suspects of the U.S. tech journalists, or maybe even somebody from abroad. Last year I had Michael Josh.
Oh, cool.
Of Gadget Match as my guest because he was there on site. But it'll be somebody that's on site. So stay tuned. Hopefully they'll launch this phone there and we'll be able to talk about it without guessing In the meantime, what are your thoughts on this Moto RAZR stuff? As you know, that's another very US-centric thing. The Moto RAZR was a huge hit here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of nostalgia for it. So a folding phone in that form factor is very interesting. It's going the other direction from the Galaxy Fold, right? Instead of making your regular phone bigger, this is making your regular phone smaller when it folds in half.
Yeah, I like it. Like, I'm a fan of all cutting edge technology, and I think this will fit in the pocket a lot better than the Mate X or the Galaxy Fold. But
for sure,
but unfolded, the screen becomes like just longer
super
than it is like a tablet
and
size.
narrow. Yeah.
So I guess this will be completely for productivity, because you won't be able to benefit from it like watching a video in tablet size. Instead, it'll be good for running 2 apps side by side, or like a super long like Google Keep Notes or something. That would be fun.
Well, I think I think that if they can pull it off so it's reliable enough and the price is reasonable enough compared to like the $2,000, $3,000 that we're seeing from the Mate X and the Galaxy Fold, I think this might fit well with teenagers in a way, or young people that are doing a lot of portrait video, right?
Yeah.
That are doing Snapchat stories and Facebook stories and Instagram stories. And imagine being able to run Instagram on the top half in portrait mode and on the bottom half in portrait mode have your text messaging or your Snapchat or your WhatsApp app running, right? And as long as the keyboard is a good experience, I'm thinking productivity more in a social media communication kind of aspect than more in the traditional business kind of aspect.
Okay,
here,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, that phone could super hit a nerve with that kind of crowd. And especially in the US, where it's going to be subsidized and sold by the carriers at about the same price as probably like a Galaxy S10 Plus, or an iPhone 10s Max. So at that price point, maybe you'll pick that phone because, if they can keep it under $1,000 or even $1,200, some people are going to go nuts for it. And the fact that they can flip it in half, like snap it in half and then get the nice satisfying snap sound, stick it in their back pocket, assuming it's thin enough that it's, maybe even if it's 1.5 times the thickness of a regular flagship today when it's folded, I think they're going to love it. I think it's going to be, if they execute on this properly, I think it's going to be a hit.
Yeah, I thought, and the form factor has its benefits, because this one, it'll be a lot easier to hold even when it's unfolded.
Exactly. And clear phone calls too, because you'll be able to put the mic near your face. Right?
Yeah.
When you hold it to your ear. That was one of the big advantages of the Moto RAZR, the original. So
yeah.
I don't know, I'm exciting. It's the first time we've seen a leak of the actual phone, at least a render of it. So let's see what happens. Speaking of flagships, how do you feel about gaming phones? Because I'm not a fan. I just feel like,
oh, me neither.
It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun that they exist, but like, what's the point exactly?
Yeah, they're
I mean,
they're, in my opinion, gimmicks, because other than having like a lighter strip on the back and I guess usually they'll have stereo,
maybe some shoulder buttons or something.
Like I can do the exact same thing on any flagship. Like a Samsung Galaxy S10 can run any game just as well as any Nubia Red Magic or the Honor Play or RAZR
a Pocophone F1 again, it can run pretty much any game really well as well. I agree with you.
The only exception is the RAZR phone. I love that 120 hertz refresh rate. That I love, because that you can actually see the benefits to it.
Well, so there are, as you know, the Asus ROG phone has 90 hertz OLED, and there's rumors that the OnePlus 7 Pro will have a 90 hertz.
Yeah,
OLED
I'm excited for that, because it's like one of those things where once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like when I was scrolling on the RAZR phone. So that's the only element of a gaming phone that I think has actual benefits, the refresh rate. Other than that, like, what does having a lighter strip on the back do? I have no idea why.
Yeah,
and every
and
phone has
some
one.
kind of obnoxious industrial design to go along with it.
Yeah,
too, right?
like I usually am pretty snarky when I review phones, so I've always poked fun at that, and I know it's annoying.
That's what we like about you, Ben.
Thanks.
That's what we like about you. The reason I'm bringing this up, by the way, in case you're wondering, all of you listeners, is that Nubia launched a Red Magic 3 like a week ago, a few days ago, with which is a gaming phone, the next generation with a Snapdragon 855, whereas the Red Magic Mars was 845 based. And this thing has a cooling fan built in, unlike the Asus ROG phone that has an external cooling fan accessory. And it can record 8K video. So that's the gimmicks or features. I don't want to be mean because I haven't played with it, but yeah. So it's a thing. It's weird that it's coming out literally 3 months or 2 months after the Red Magic Mars. But what do you think of this? I mean, you've probably seen it, or at least saw Richard Lai's story on Engadget.
I only saw it from Richard Lai's story. I have not seen the phone. I think I reviewed the Red Magic 2. I didn't give it a good review, so I think I haven't heard back from Nubia since. So maybe I'm no longer on the review.
Are they mad at you?
Maybe, because I was quite critical of the Nubia Red Magic 2.
Well, I have one. I played with it. And honestly, to me, I'm not a big gamer, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it just feels like, okay, it's a flagship. It feels like a flagship, but why would I buy this instead of... honestly, this is, again, where I'm going back. Why would I buy this instead of a phone that has a budget price tag, but is a flagship in disguise, like the Honor Play, like the Pocophone F1? Because, they're cheaper than these gaming phones, and they perform, at least at the time when Snapdragon 845 was King of the Roost, just as well,
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. As you said, the high display rate and maybe the shoulder buttons, but the rest of it, I mean, I didn't hate the Nubia Red Magic Mars, but I felt like I couldn't really recommend it. I'm like, spend your money somewhere on something else and still play games, Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Well, listen, I think we've covered everything and we should probably wrap it up. Do you want to tell the audience where they can find you online? Because I know you write for a whole bunch of different publications. And on top of that, you have your YouTube channel.
Yeah, so I'm basically like an independent tech reviewer. So I started out mainly writing for Forbes. I'm a contributor for the Forbes, so I write about tech. But I've been trying to, this might get me in trouble. I've been trying to distance myself from it because, Forbes, unfortunately, is known for a lot of clickbait. And it really annoys the heck out of me that my stuff gets associated with that because I don't do clickbait at all. My stuff is like, I try to do real work, basically. So I still do tech writing on Forbes, but I am trying to build my YouTube channel so it's my own thing. And then I also review for the South China Morning Post, which is like a English newspaper in Hong Kong. They're actually owned by Alibaba, so they have a lot of money now. They were struggling before, but now they have a lot of money.
Nice. Cool. And so what's your Twitter handles and Instagram and all the other social handles where people can find you?
My Twitter handle, it's Ben C. Sin. So it's just my name, Ben with a C, my middle initials, and my last name. But a disclaimer to potential followers. My Twitter handle, I talk about a bunch of stuff. Like, I'm quite opinionated. So I'll talk about a lot of movies and my thoughts on US politics, all that. So it's not a specifically like tech personality Twitter handle.
But that's what makes you more interesting, Ben.
I hope
that's
so,
because
I know that some people probably have followed me because they think I'm just gonna treat phones, and then they'll be like, oh, I have to unfollow him now because he's like ranting about Donald Trump. But I just want to be upfront. So don't follow me if you are pro MAGA, basically.
We make fun of Trump on this show a lot.
Okay.
So don't worry.
Yeah.
You're in good company. You know where to find me. I'm at Tankgirl on Twitter and Instagram. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character Tankgirl, but without the vowels. And I do have a YouTube channel that's a complement to the podcast. You'll see unboxings, hands-on, sometimes reviews, but just mostly visual content to go with the show here. YouTube.com/Miriam Jouar. That's my full name spelled out. If you don't know how to spell my name, go to my Twitter and my full name is there. So just spell my full name without spaces. And my YouTube will pop up on youtube.com. Also, please subscribe to the podcast if you stumbled upon the podcast by accident. It's mobiletechpodcast.com, the URL. You can find the RSS feed there, but we're on all the big platforms, Apple, Google, Pocket Cast, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, even Spotify. So just look for Mobile Tech Podcast and hopefully subscribe. Remember, tell your friends about the YouTube and subscribe to that. Like the videos if you do. All that good stuff. I also want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible.com is the place to go for audiobooks. If you love books, but maybe you can't read because you're driving all day or working all day and you need to be paying attention visually to what you're doing, Audible.com's got you covered. Great books, great selection. Many books are read by the authors, which I think is really cool. Check it out. There is a special deal. If you subscribe to Audible now, you'll get 30-day free trial with the link that's in the show notes. And so that's a pretty cool thing. 30-day free trial. audibletrial.com/mobiletech is the link. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. I'll put it in the show description as well. So thanks, Ben, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is my first time as a podcast guest talking about tech.
Well, listen, you're like a pro. Like you sound like a total natural. You should come back sometime.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely have you back in the future. And in the meantime, folks, stay tuned for next week's show. We'll have one, of course, as always. And until then, take care. Cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.